Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Recovery Talk. And today we are going to talk about the fear of restoring weight without mentally recovering. And I want to talk a bit about how this may not just be your healthy self wanting to do recovery the right way. It may actually be a bit rooted sometimes in your eating disorder and in recovery perfectionism and in the fear of weight gain. And I want to talk a bit about how to actually work with this fear and how to tell if it is your healthy self or your eating disorder. So, this is a fear I see all the time in coaching. And wanting to actually address those sneaky little eating disorder things that keep people stuck is probably one of the most common reasons why people do coaching to begin with, because that's kind of what coaching specializes in, at least in the way that I do recovery coaching. I often think of myself as like a recovery detective where I kind of go in, analyze, figure out where someone is stuck, and then we set some goals on how to actually counter that and how to help people get unstuck. But interestingly enough, what I sometimes find once I peel the layer off the onion, right, is that the fear of gaining weight without mentally recovering is sometimes what keeps people stuck from actually recovering. And it can be so hard to really identify it because again, it's in many ways a really healthy goal to want to be mentally free. So, how do you know then if it's your eating disorder or not? And I'm going to share a way to actually differentiate a little bit later in this episode. So, to begin with, why do people have this fear? And does everyone have this fear? So, not everyone who is recovering has this fear. I remember for myself, I was in the complete opposite situation where part of me was like, okay, I'll restore weight to wherever I need to be for my treatment team to be happy, but then I'll still keep the behaviors. That to me, at that stage of my eating disorder, sounded like a really good and tempting option. And then once I started going with recovery and I started noticing all of the positive benefits, I became more like, ooh, I actually want to work on this. And I'm actually sharing this because I think a lot of times people think you have to like really want recovery to recover. That was not my experience. I feel like I just got pushed into it because I had no choice. But that being said, as a coach, I typically work with people who are a bit more self-motivated, not necessarily pushed into recovery in the same way. And if they are, coaching probably wouldn't be the best fit. So from my experience, I see way more people in the other camp where the thought of being quote unquote weight restored but still being mentally sick seems like the absolutely worst case outcome. And why is that? So first of all, I think a lot of people with eating disorders have had an experience at some point in the past where they have gained weight without necessarily having worked on the mental part. Maybe they feel like they gained weight due to their eating disorder rather than actually being better. For example, maybe they entered a phase of binge purge or binge restrict. Maybe they feel like they got pushed to gain weight by their treatment team, but there wasn't enough focus on actually the rewiring, body image, sneaky movement behaviors, etc., etc. So they remember being healthier and maybe even being discharged from services that they probably still really needed. Or maybe it's a case for some people of restoring weight and then freaking out and confusing how you felt about restoring some weight in recovery, but not yet being fully recovered with this is just how it's like to be recovered. And I know I talk about this one a lot, that there is a difference between being in recovery versus being recovered. In recovery, yeah, you probably not going to feel great about your body. It's going to be scary. Things are changing. But that's not necessarily how your body image is going to be for the rest of your life as a recovered and weight restored person. I also think a lot of people have very triggering core memories of having gained weight. Maybe those comments happened at a very vulnerable time, at a very vulnerable age, and they are just so terrified of feeling that hurt again. And they're thinking, well, if I'm not fully mentally recovered, I won't tolerate that. So then the weight restoration has to come with mental recovery, so I'll be resilient enough. So yeah, people often will have so many experiences that kind of reinforce this fear. But I think when we really start digging, what we often see is that there is a core view of weight gain as bad. Oftentimes not rationally, because people can often be able to identify a lot of very important and positive things about weight restoration. But there is a part of them that sees it as like a necessary evil rather than a really positive and important and beneficial thing with so many good things for your mental and physical health. So from the eating disorder perspective, it's a fear of quote unquote unnecessary weight gain. And that's what I want to challenge a bit here. There is no such thing as unnecessary weight restoration. Weight restoration is a good thing. And I know some of you may have disagreements around this, and you know what? That's completely fine. But from my perspective, I think it is better and safer to be mentally not fully there, but be weight restored, rather than being mentally not there and not be weight restored, just because of all of the physical and mental consequences of suppressing your weight. And I sometimes feel a little bit like something doesn't feel quite right. And sometimes when I see in recovery spaces, where I feel like recovery spaces almost make it seem like it's the other way around. That if you are restoring weight, but you're not 100% mentally there, then it was a waste and there was no point. And now you're just even more lost. So here's my perspective. Weight restoration is a part of recovery, but it's not the entire recovery. It is an essential, non-negotiable of recovery. But the truth is, oftentimes, weight restoration is what happens first, and then the mental recovery is something that takes a little bit longer. But if you're at a point where you're weight restored, but you're not mentally there, you can work on the mental part. This is how it often happens. This is how it was for me, at least. I restored my weight, and I had to keep challenging myself. It is possible, but far less common for it to be the other way around, where you're mentally fully recovered, but physically not there. And I think sometimes this is what people with eating disorders in recovery want. They either want to mentally recover first and then recover physically, or they think that mental and physical recovery follows the exact same linear path. And this sets people up for unrealistic expectations of recovery. It sets people up for feeling like they're failing. And I think it prevents people from actually going to the point of full recovery. I even sometimes hear from people that they are like, oh, I'll just relapse and lose the weight and then I will recover the right way. And it's like, no, what are you on about? Why can't you work on the rewiring when you weight restored? Why do you have to go backwards and then work on it? And don't get me wrong, of course, I would strongly recommend that if you are in a phase of weight restoration, to work on the mental part as well. Don't just save it. Don't just have like a meal plan that has 0 challenges. Don't neglect things like sneaky movement behaviors, body checking, etc., etc. But if you, for example, are fresh out of a residential treatment where you don't feel like there was enough maybe focus on that, that does not mean that you should go backwards physically so that you can work on the mental part. It just means that there's more work to be done. It is never too late. And like I said, weight restoration is never a waste. It is not the be-all, end-all of recovery. And like I said, yes, it is best if you can also combine it with rewiring work and challenging yourself. But if that for one reason or another didn't happen to you, that does not mean you should relapse and start from scratch. It's the worst idea ever. And it's so paradoxical because what I sometimes see is people who actually do that. Like they fall back and then they think, oh, I'll start from scratch. When they start from scratch, their eating disorder still don't let them do the rewiring work. It's not like your eating disorder suddenly going to be like, oh yeah, I'll do all of the fear foods and all of the fear behaviors now, and now I will feel super comfortable not walking, for example, etc., etc. It's just a fantasy. You kind of just do recovery again, same way, and then it's the same fear, and then you go back, and it's just an endless cycle. And that's the key differentiator between a healthy self-belief or an eating disorder belief. Does it move you forward or does it keep you stuck? Does it drive you towards action or does it keep you stuck in inaction? Because if you're someone in recovery who's like, yeah, I want to work on rewiring and I want to work on weight restoration, awesome, good, great. If that inspires you to push yourself a bit more, implement more fear foods, work on maybe movement behaviors, address things like body checking, then that is an awesome thing. But if it instead keeps you stuck, then it's not really your healthy self. I always say perfectionism is procrastination. And I know I talk about recovery perfectionism all the time, but be very, very critical here. If you are someone who feel like you have to do recovery the perfect way, the right way, How much of that comes from the part of you that actually just really cares about recovery and want to do it well and want full freedom? And how much of it comes from an anxious, perfectionistic part of you that feels like recovery can only be justified and worth it if you get like an A plus in recovery? What can happen here can sometimes be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe you're someone who, maybe you're in quasi-recovery and you're like, okay, I should probably push a bit more. I should maybe restore a bit of weight. But what if it doesn't work? What if I gain the weight, but I don't get the mental benefits? And then the fear of failure prevents you from trying to begin with. But here's the thing, even if you gain the weight and you feel like, oh, there's still mental work to be done, then keep doing the mental work. It is not a hindrance. And don't underestimate the benefits of weight restoration on your cognitive health. Yes, of course, you also need to have behavioral change, but the act of being weight suppressed comes with cognitive side effects such as increased rigidity, increased anxiety, worse sleep, which then makes you feel even worse and more anxious and stressed and burnt out, increased food noise, not to mention all the physical side effects. So weight restoration is always going to be worth it. And weirdly enough, I think one of the things that made me kind of flip over to full recovery was actually gaining a bit more weight. Because in my case, I was so undernourished and underweight that my brain was just not thinking rationally. And then once I'd been refed for some time and I started reaching a healthier weight, that is when I actually started feeling really like, oh, actually, I want to go the last mile. And yes, it would maybe have been a different situation if I got there by engaging in eating disorder behaviors like binging and purging, or even restricting myself to weight restoration, because this is also often what happens. Someone increased their intake a little bit, but not really enough for metabolism to speed up. And maybe they have some reactive eating and then they freak out and restrict a bit and it just becomes a cycle. So yeah, I understand, again, there is nuance here. But a lot of times I see this in people who are looking to take steps towards recovery and they're thinking, this may make me gain weight, it may make me mentally more free, but what if the weight gain comes before the mental freedom? Or what if I don't get all of the mental freedom as quickly as I wanted to? Or what if it is not even possible for me to get that mental freedom? What if recovery don't work? And here I am just with more weight on me and my eating disorder hates it and blah, blah, blah. So now let's move on to more the practical bits here. What can you actually do with this fear? Well, first of all, you can remind yourself that being physically weight restored and mentally not quite there is actually not the worst place to be, because there is no point when it stops being possible to do the mental work. So even if that quote unquote worst case scenario were to come true, it doesn't put you in the worst place. It is a complete eating disorder belief that you can only do recovery things and challenges when you are in a weight restoration phase. And for the vast majority of people, you're going to have to keep doing that work when you're weight restored, because weight restoration is often the first part of recovery that you can tick off the list. It's the quickest thing. And sometimes you don't even have to do recovery stuff. Sometimes your body just decides enough is enough. So what if you gain weight and you're not mentally there? So what? Do the work. It's fine. It's okay. And if you find that the fear prevents you from doing the work, so imagine you're in recovery, maybe you do know that you're not quite at your set point range yet, but you're scared of what if I do the work and I gain weight and I'm not going to be quite there. One thing I like to ask clients is, well, can you think of any evidence that rewiring has worked for you? Is there anything you can do now that you couldn't do before? Is there anything that's less scary? Are there any eating disorder behaviors you have been able to rewire? And a lot of times people will look back and realize, oh yeah, I can remember when I challenged this food or challenged this behavior, it did become easier eventually. And for people who may have had bad experiences with weight restoration in the past, maybe where they have been pushed into weight restoration with zero addressing the rewiring behaviors, or maybe they have been in a case where they gained weight while still engaging in eating disorder behaviors, I like to remind them, okay, but what is your path now? What did you do back then and what are you doing now? Like you're on two different paths here. Because we are here addressing the rewiring. I am not your old treatment center. And you're not engaging in that constant purging behavior that you used to do. You're leaning into the reactive hunger. Can you see that you're doing something different? When you're doing different things, you end up in different places. So I remind people that different behaviors lead to different outcomes. But equally, if you do nothing, if you let that fear stop you from rewiring, if you let the fear of rewiring not working stop you from engaging in rewiring behaviors, then yeah, I mean, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the truth is, yeah, your body may still gain the weight, but the solution is not try to stop the weight gain. The solution is to rewire more, to challenge yourself more, to address all aspects of eating disorder recovery, and especially to address the things you don't want to address. What are the things in recovery that you're avoiding? What are the things that you dread bringing up in your therapy or coaching session or your dietitian appointment? What are the things you get really defensive around? What are the things where you get almost like a physical response by the thought of challenging? And yeah, it's completely okay if you feel like you have to go a little bit step by step here, but are you moving in the right direction? So I'm not always a fan about endlessly arguing back and forth with the eating disorder, because I think that can for some people quickly turn to a form of rumination. But it can be helpful for some people to kind of counter your eating disorder if it starts doing the whole thing. What if you gain weight, but you're mentally going to be stuck? No, to be like, okay, cool. I'll make sure I challenge myself then. I'll make sure I work on the rewiring. I'll make sure I do this fear for challenge. And if you notice then your brain is like, your eating disorder brain is like, no, you're not. Then you know it's not really about just my brain just really wants to be free. I just really want to do recovery the right way. If it was all about wanting to, quote unquote, do recovery the right way and make sure you get really recovered, then you would find that your brain would be like, yeah, do all the challenges, do all the scary things, go all in. But if your brain instead just holds you away from recovery, then it's an eating disorder thing. It's your eating disorder co-opting recovery and trying to make it seem like you just want to do it right, so you do nothing at all. Or you hold yourself back. The eating disorder is always going to try and rebrand itself. I think a good reminder about rewiring is that it's not this thing of, will it work, will it not work? Like, it is a biological reality that if you repeat something enough and enough, it changes your brain. Like they say, neurons that fire together, wire together. I would go as far as saying it's impossible for no rewiring to occur if you're repeatedly challenging yourself and you're not engaging in safety behaviors, of course, because this is a little bit of a side note. There are certain things that keep people stuck even if they are challenging. I've done an episode about this in the past called Rewiring Part 2, how sneaky habits and safety behaviors keep you stuck. And it's a bit on how someone may, for example, challenge a certain fear food over and over, but feel like it's not becoming less scary. And then they may realize that they're doing all sorts of sneaky little safety behaviors around it that actually tells the brain that this is dangerous. So just a bit of a listen if you're like, oh, but I have been challenging myself and I feel just as stuck. Chances are you're doing something that keeps you stuck. But as long as you're repeatedly doing things that are scary and you notice that the scary things become slightly less scary with time and you can kind of level up the challenges, then yeah, things are changing. You are becoming more mentally free. But don't put that unrealistic expectation of yourself that only then can you restore the weight. Accept that a lot of times weight restoration comes first, and that's not a sign of failure. And acknowledge that weight restoration itself has lots of benefits mentally and physically. And a big part of recovery is about taking a leap of faith. And I know. Oh my God, I just hate, even when I say that, I'm like, no, like not in recovery, but for myself, like not knowing like what's going on. Ugh. Give me certainty, give me predictability. When people tell me, let's just go with the flow, Amalia, I'm like, no. When does the flow start? When does it end? How is the flow going to be like? I get it. That's how my brain is wired. And I think for a lot of people with eating disorders, that's how their brain is wired, either due to the eating disorder or due to a personality predisposition that makes someone more likely to develop an eating disorder to begin with, or just due to anxiety, right? But the truth is, when it comes to recovery, nobody can predict with 100% certainty how it's going to be like for you, where your weight is going to end up, how it's going to feel like mentally, etc., etc. The only thing you can do is to give it a go and try and give it time and give it effort. Not just dipping your toes into recovery for a week and then freaking out when you're not fully recovered. That's just not how it works. Give it time, give it commitment. And don't let your anxiety be what drives your recovery and what decides what to do and not to do. An anxiety-driven recovery is just not going to get you very far. You're going to have to connect with that rational, healthy self part. And if that's hard, at least working with someone who can help you identify and connect with that part, because that part is there. I mean, you're listening to this podcast. I know that there is a part of you that knows a bit what to do. And another thing to think about, if you let the fear of gaining weight but not mentally fully recovering keep you from doing recovery things, if it keeps you stuck and you never go for that full recovery, then how is that going to feel like? Like for the rest of your life? Is it going to be that thing of, damn, the one that got away almost? Even if you were to try full recovery and all of the worst fears came true and you hated it and it sucked and it relapsed, isn't it better to regret what you did rather than something you never did? How would it be like to live with a constant what if? To know that there could have been a version of you that is so much more free, but you were too scared of giving that version of you a chance to come alive? And not just that constant what if, but also the thing of, how would it feel like if you did this maybe 20 years from now and it went really well? Wouldn't it be a part of you that's going to regret that you didn't do it sooner? That you didn't do it the first time you considered it? And like I always say, people who have taken those final steps to recovery, they typically don't regret it. But so many people regret that they didn't do it sooner. And whether you're in the boat of, oh, I want to recover but not gain weight, or I want to gain weight but not recover, I mean, you can't pick and choose. Recovery is not a buffet where you can just pick the things you want from recovery and then leave the things you don't want. And you're going to have to accept that you cannot always plan and control exactly how it's going to be like, exactly what is going to heal the quickest versus the slowest. So, for example, if you're going to be mentally recovered first or physically recovered first, it's not always linear, and it doesn't have to be. Both are important things you're going to have to tick off in recovery, but even if you have to tick off the physical part before the mental part, that is not a sign of failure. Yes, try to combine them. Don't fall into the trap of just pushing the whole rewiring thing until a future point. Definitely challenge yourself. Even if you are maybe on a meal plan and a bit more of a structured recovery, there's probably going to be things you can challenge. Even in how you're preparing your food, or the things you do or don't do outside of the meal plan. Or you can even discuss with your dietitian, hey, I want to actually challenge myself a bit more. Can we work on that? And even though for someone, especially who is in early recovery, the initial focus is typically going to be more just refeeding, any good dietitian, especially as a little bit of time has gone by, is going to be wanting to work with you on that. But you may have to advocate a bit for yourself. You may have to take a bit of initiative. And I know the eating disorder hates that, blah, blah, blah. But you're going to have to help the people around you help you. And as difficult as it is, try to see weight restoration as an essential and lovely and healing part of recovery, not a necessary evil. And do you know what? What I tend to see over and over is that once someone reaches that higher weight, it's very rarely as bad as they thought it would be. The process of getting there, the uncertainty, the changes, yeah, that can be very difficult. But once you're stable at a weight that your body is more happy with, people usually handle that a lot better than they think they would. And if not, you can always go back to your eating disorder. Unfortunately, it's always going to be there. If you gain weight and you're like, oh, but I'm not mentally there, well, you can lose that weight. I mean, should you? No, please don't do that. But you can. You're always going to have that bodily autonomy. And I know, of course, eating disorder is going to do the thing of, no, you won't be able to lose it. Like you will suddenly just stop having the ability to relapse, which would have been amazing. I mean, I wish that was true, but it's just not. But that's how you know it's the eating disorder. It starts going into conspiracy thinking, and it prevents you from moving forward rather than using the fear as a motivation to just go really all in with recovery. And I've said this before, but one of the things that I see when I work with someone who's gotten out on the other side is that they will often say that what they had to do was to just stop trying to control everything and just lean into the process. Whether that was leaning into their hunger, leaning into recovery, sometimes even leaning into the goals we set that felt so wrong. And they were just like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to predict everything. Nobody can tell the future. But one thing we can probably predict is that spending the rest of your life with the eating disorder due to fears and conspiracies and what ifs is probably not going to be a very good place to be. And the last experience that I want to talk about, which is a very valid one, is people who are in treatment and they're scared that if they recover physically before they're mentally recovered, they will be discharged and it will be like, bye bye, you're fully recovered now, you don't need more support. Or they may not be able to access help anymore. And that is absolutely a systemic problem in eating disorder care, especially in more public services or when dealing with things like insurance companies in certain countries. But here's the thing. What's the alternative? How are you actually going to get to recovery while still holding on to weight suppression? And if that specific treatment or support team can only see you when you are at a certain weight, are you sure that's the right form of support for you? Are you sure that is actually sending you towards full recovery? Because I see people stuck in this over and over where they're almost afraid of being fully recovered because they're scared of losing treatment support, but the treatment support isn't actually helping them get fully recovered. So it's like, but why are you in the treatment support then? Isn't the whole point for you to go through treatment so that you don't need treatment anymore and so that you feel like, I don't want treatment anymore? I remember for myself, when I was at like the later stages of eating disorder recovery, I was kind of like, oh, I got treatment again. Oh. And I know sometimes with my clients that in a way we can tell when they're in a good place, when they come up to session and it's kind of not that much to talk about. They're more focused on other things. Of course, we want to be a little bit critical here because sometimes that avoidance can be a way of like avoiding the recovery work that's left. So I want to just make a side note there. Once you get to a point of like, I don't have that much to talk about anymore about my eating disorder. I don't really feel like I need this support anymore. That's the time to graduate from that support. But any eating disorder practitioners that are worth having will know that it's not just about your weight and it's going to help you get towards those final stages. But if your current support team aren't doing that, then maybe you just have to accept that that work is not something you'll be able to do with them. But that doesn't mean that them helping you towards weight restoration is inherently a waste and that you shouldn't do that. If your support keeps you stuck, it's not support. The whole point is to move you forward. And yes, maybe you're not in a place yet where you're ready to take those steps towards recovery. Maybe it's more just, harm reduction and making sure you're essentially not dying. That's better than nothing, don't get me wrong. But you're going to have to be honest with yourself about what you need for full recovery, what kind of support that would be, how it will look like, and be upfront with whoever you're working with about what you need. And if they can't offer that, the solution is to find other forms of support instead of being like, oh, I'll just stay sick then. And maybe also reflect a bit on, is this based on past wounds? Maybe you're one of the many people who have been seeking out support when you were very vulnerable, but there was a part of you that was hoping to be seen and heard, and then you were dismissed based on your weight. And maybe your brain just remember that feeling and is trying to protect you from it, even if that means holding yourself back. So be a bit mindful of, is it you reacting to what's going on now, or is it based on previous experiences? Because the truth is, you're not going to be able to fully recover if you're still trying to stay sick. You can't just play both sides here. And yes, of course, getting rid of the eating disorder is often a process. It's not just you wake up one morning and decide not to have an eating disorder and it's completely gone. But you're going to at least have to be willing to gradually peel off the layers of the eating disorder rather than almost trying to see how sick can I stay while still being in recovery. How much of the eating disorder can I keep while still telling myself I'm getting better? Is it really working for you? So self-honesty is key. Be honest about what fears are actually pretty rational fears, or what motivations are actually just your healthy self trying to make sure you're doing it in a way that works for you, versus what is eating disorder conspiracies meant to hold you back, even if it's trying to camouflage itself as being from your healthy recovery self. And remember, there is a big difference between knowing what you need to do and actually doing it. I see so many times people being reluctant to seek out support for their eating disorder because they, quote unquote, know what to do anyways. Well, yeah, that's the case for almost everyone with an eating disorder. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have support, that it could be helpful to have someone to set goals with. Treatment shouldn't be just someone telling you exactly what to do. A lot of times it is working with what is actually keeping you stuck. So accept that maybe you need some extra support, especially if you're trying to do it on your own, but you're just not getting anywhere. There's no shame in that. Recovery is worth the weight gain. And weight gain is actually pretty nice. Not necessarily the process of getting there, but once you're there, it is not a bad place to be. I've now been weight restored for 12 years, I think. I've been actually at a relatively stable weight since then. Of course, life happened, weight fluctuates a bit here and there, but I don't weigh myself, so I've not really been quite aware of that. But I've been at a range that my eating disorder self would have seen as way too high. And part of that was because there was a time in my eating disorder where I decided to loosen up my eating disorder rules just a tiny little bit. And I immediately gained a lot of weight to not quite where I am now, but I gained weight. And I remember feeling so big and so uncomfortable. And since that experience, I thought that is how it's going to be like to be weight restored. But that has just not been the case for me at all. So don't confuse past weight restoration experiences or weight gain experiences with how it's necessarily going to be like to be fully recovered. You got to give it time. All right, guys. Oh, there's so much more I could have spoken about in this episode. This is just such a big topic that comes up over and over and over. But I have to leave it here so the episode don't get overly long. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, or if you're enjoying the podcast, please do leave a rating, share with a friend. Maybe you know someone who really needs to hear this. And also, if you have a specific thing you want me to do an episode on, feel free to leave a comment on Spotify or on my Instagram if you don't use Spotify. Of course, I can't promise I will do an episode on the topic you request, but if I notice that there is a topic that several people comment or ask about, I will try my best to prioritize it. I'll pop it on my list of topics to cover, a very long list in a very long Google document I have. I mean, after so many years, you would think I would run out of topics, but absolutely not. So yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Amalia Lee or at letsrecover.co.uk. And my website for coaching and any similar inquiries is letsrecover.co.uk. See you guys in the next episode.